I'm Tori Bedford. Tonight on Greater Boston, a joint effort between several cities and towns to combat homelessness and domestic violence. We hear from some of the leaders behind the new collaboration. Plus, the state Senate just passed an ambitious new bill to make childcare more affordable in Massachusetts. Will it be enough? And finally, an art center in Brookline is highlighting nearly 100 artists with disabilities. GBH News' culture show host Jared Bowen takes us there as it celebrates its 50th anniversary. Nearly 20,000 people are unhoused in Massachusetts, a number that's risen in recent years thanks in large part to the rising cost of housing in the state. And cities and towns are struggling to help their residents on their own. That's why 8 communities are pooling their resources. Malden, Arlington, Chelsea, Everett, Medford, Melrose, Revere, and Winthrop plan to split nearly $2 million in federal American Rescue Plan money for programs to support people experiencing homelessness. Kelly Turley, Associate Director of the Mass Coalition for the Homeless, joins me now, along with Alex Pratt, Malden's Deputy Director of Housing and Community Development, and Laura Rosie, CEO of Housing Families. Thank you all for being here. So, Alex, you're running this program. Obviously, it's 8 cities and towns, but you've kind of been heading it. Why is it important for these municipalities to be combining forces?
Homelessness is a problem that affects every city and town in Massachusetts, from the big cities like Boston to small rural communities. The problem is that for smaller communities and even smaller cities, we don't have the resources to address this one by one. We have to work together to solve this problem. And so that's what this program is all about. It's about pooling our resources, but also recognizing that serving the homeless population means meeting them where they are. And they might sleep in Malden one night and then Medford the next, and they're still someone that we need to serve.
Right, and I think, there's been so much focus on Boston. Is a part of this to relieve some of that pressure from Boston? Because we've heard from Boston Mayor Michelle Wu in the past that leaders across the state need to come in and offer resources to address the statewide housing crisis. Is part of this about relieving Boston?
No, it's not. It's about addressing the challenges that we have in our own communities. We've had homelessness in Malden and in all of these 8 communities for a very long time. So it's not about relieving Boston. It's really about addressing the needs in our communities and making sure that no matter where someone is homeless, that they're going to have some services that will help them stay alive and get housed.
And Kelly, you can speak to that. I mean, we've done so many stories together about the issue of homelessness in Boston, but across the state, kind of what does the scope of that look like now?
We're seeing that in every community, as Alex noted, whether it's urban, suburban, or rural, that there are high rates of housing instability and homelessness, and those rates continue to increase. A lot of the discussion recently has been around newly arrived immigrant families and individuals coming to the Commonwealth, but even before there was an increase in the number of newly arrived immigrants, we saw high rates of housing instability and homelessness that have only grown. A lot of it is connected to the loss of homelessness prevention dollars that came in from the federal government during the peak pandemic period, the loss of eviction protections and partial restoration of those protections, but that we are seeing the lack of deeply affordable units and wages that aren't keeping up with the cost of rent. And so we are seeing high number of individuals and families across the Commonwealth experiencing homelessness.
And Laura, you'll be working with these municipalities, but you already have been, right? With Housing Families, you've been working on this for decades. What are you seeing right now in these communities? Can you kind of describe the need and talk a little bit about what you'll be doing when this program starts up in April?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. To Alex's point, I'm really excited about this program because it is working within the 8 communities and not having to kind of piecemeal where our services are going. So we are putting together a team where we will have, the director of our homelessness services overseeing a program manager who's going to be supervising 3 case managers that are going to be going out and meeting folks that are on the street and kind of determining what their needs are and building relationships with them. We're also going to have a mental health clinician as part of the team, just to kind of help us with encouraging them to move on and find other places that are safe for them to be. And again, with that relationship building piece. And then we have just a broader homelessness prevention program that is more, we'll be working with folks who are maybe bouncing around from house to house, or, at risk of eviction, or has some domestic violence issues. So we have a broad range, and just really, especially on the individual side, really excited about the opportunity to work across the communities.
So you'll be using, this, I think it's 1.8 million in ARPA funds, and individual municipalities were already using their share of ARPA funds and finding that it just wasn't enough. By pooling these, will that be enough? Is this going to be enough? This plan is over the next 4 years. Will you be needing to bring in more funding to support this?
These 8 communities have a long history, a long track record of working together to build affordable housing with federal funds. With these particular federal funds, these 8 communities collectively applied for and received it, so it's separate from the ARPA funding, the American Rescue Plan Act funding that cities and towns have been using for the last several years. So we're fortunate to be able to apply for and use these resources together. With anything, we see that the federal government and the state government are the best providers of funds for cities and towns to take on this work, and that cities and towns are usually best equipped to know their communities so well, especially working with nonprofits who are on the ground, like Housing Families. So what we really are planning on doing is, over the next 4 years, building a case using our work, using our evidence of work and the benefits that we can produce, to be in dialogue with both our state legislators and our congressional delegation to advocate for more funding going on, because this problem is not going away.
Right. And will you have to make tough decisions about, how are you planning to make those tough decisions, that they're inevitable, about which communities receive which services or how much funding? Will this mean that ultimately some places who might be in greater need will receive more? How will that work? The beauty of this approach is that the 8 cities and towns are not looking at this as 8 different jurisdictions for Laura and her team to respond to. It's one jurisdiction for her team to respond to. So we're not looking at, Chelsea, for example, does a lot of great work on homelessness prevention and response, but we're not measuring, what our resources in Chelsea will be versus our resources in Melrose, and docking Melrose or docking Chelsea for one thing or another. We're really looking at where is the greatest need and where can we spend our resources. And a huge part of this, I think, is also about people at risk of homelessness, right, and keeping people in their homes. Can you talk about the scale of that, Kelly, across the state?
Yeah, it's enormous. It's really a huge issue that we're encouraging legislators and the governor to focus on more intensely. There's a lot of focus on how can we make sure that we're helping families and individuals avoid entering shelter, but not necessarily providing the resources that are needed to do that. And so we're seeing in every community across the Commonwealth an increasing number of families and individuals who are falling behind on rent, unable to access the resources to stay in place. One key tool that has been used that has been weakened this year is the RAFT Homelessness Prevention Program, Residential Assistance for Families in Transition. Up until last year, families and individuals could access up to $10,000 to pay for back rent, back utility bills, as well as startup costs for new apartments. And the maximum grant in that program has been decreased to $7,000, regardless of household size, regardless of the going rent in that community. And we're seeing that more and more families and individuals who otherwise could have retained their housing are being pushed into greater housing instability or into homelessness. And we're hoping that in the upcoming state budget for the fiscal year that starts in July, that we'll be able to restore some of those resources, not just through the RAFT program, but as well through parallel programs like the Home-Based program, which is targeted to families that otherwise would be in shelter.
And Laura, in your work with families, are you seeing a lot of folks who are really on that brink, right, who maybe thought that no one ever thinks, right, that they're going to be in that position, but seeing more and more families who are at risk in that way?
Yeah, we've definitely seen a big influx. During COVID, there were a lot more resources being put in to help folks stay in their home. And as Kelly mentioned, we've been scaling back on some of those resources. So RAFT is the #1 go-to tool that we have to help folks. To Alex's point earlier, in terms of what else needs to be done, the shelter system is needed and it's very important, but it only works when we also have housing for folks to go into. So it will be critical that we're all advocating for the preservation of the subsidized housing that's already out there, as well as creating more so that people can move across the continuum and into permanent housing.
And Alex, I understand these communities have worked together on a number of things before. So I had asked, I think I had asked you when I wrote the story, but just about why these 8 communities, because I'm wondering if there's a possibility or some planning about moving ahead with an expansion, right, to all communities across the state, or if there's some parallel, these are all towns kind of northwest of Boston, but why these 8?
These communities have been working together since 1991 to collectively apply for and expend funds from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, mostly to build affordable housing, including for groups like this population that we're looking to serve with this new program. And that has given us the track record and the trust working together to take on new opportunities like this one. The good news for other communities who want to be doing this is that they are probably already a part of these consortiums to use HUD money for affordable housing. They just might not know about it.
Right.
And so it really is a great opportunity for select board members, for residents, for providers, for any resident who's really interested. Call town hall and see how they're using their HUD money to help homeless people.
And you've set out the blueprint already. So this is going into effect in April. Do you have a specific timeline yet?
We're still working on a specific launch date. Laura's been working on hiring folks, and we're excited to roll the services out very soon. We don't have a date specified yet beyond just April, but believe me, we're sure that as soon as the program starts, there's going to be a lot of demand for this.
Great. Alex Pratt, Kelly Turley, and Laura Rosie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us.
Massachusetts is one of the most expensive states for raising a family. In fact, the average cost of childcare is more than double what the federal government considers affordable. But state lawmakers are hoping to change that with an ambitious new childcare bill that just passed the state Senate, which, among other things, would make more families eligible for subsidies. So how big a deal is this, and what are its chances in the House? I'm joined now by GBH News State House reporter Katie Lannon and Patty Sinclair, president of the Massachusetts Association for the Education of Young Children. Thank you both so much for being here. So, Katie, what is the deal with this bill? How would it change the landscape for childcare across the state?
So there's so many things in there. It kind of tries to touch on every piece of it, right? So from building the workforce to give them more support as they develop in their career, to boost their pay with the goal of keeping these workers in the early education field so that there are more seats for families. On the family end, it would expand subsidy eligibility, like you said, so more families would be eligible for state-subsidized childcare. And there's without getting too into this percentage of the federal poverty line or the state median income, it would cap some families' out-of-pocket costs, that families that are receiving subsidies, and the eligibility threshold would change pretty dramatically. Currently, I think about $73,000 annual income for a family of 4. That would go up to $125,000. So it would make a wide swath of people more people eligible, with plans to increase that if money is available in the future, additional money. And one of the things that a lot of people in the early education field are excited about is it would make these grants that the state started giving out early in the COVID pandemic to kind of help childcare providers weather that turmoil and keep their doors open. It would make those permanent, write them into state law so that they would keep flowing.
And how big of a factor was the pandemic in kind of illustrating some of these issues, Patty? I'm curious about why this is coming now and where we're at, kind of the scale of the need for this legislation.
Yeah, firstly, we certainly want to thank Senate President Spilka for bringing this forward. This is a momentous moment for us in the early childhood education field, and fully implementing this would be transformative. It would make Massachusetts more affordable for many families, greatly improving our state's economic competitiveness and increasing racial and gender equity in our communities. This is long overdue. This is something that we've been fighting for a really long time. And, during the pandemic, we really showed up. We were the workforce behind the workforce. And now folks in legislation are standing up for us, and we're feeling very grateful today.
What kind of issues do you think this bill is tackling? I'm wondering what the state is right now for folks working in childcare, some of the things that you've had to be dealing with in the last, I'm sure some of these are really long-standing, but also some things that were highlighted during COVID.
Yeah, the C3 operational grants have really been significant in terms of centers being able to stay afloat, to stay in business, and provide childcare for the workforce to get back to work for sure. And so, as mentioned previously, this would be more stable funding in order for centers to be able to stay open, family childcare centers, et cetera. And it would enable significant public investment to help meet really the true cost of providing high quality care. And that's really what we're trying to get to, so that we can have thriving environments for children, being able to really focus on hiring and retaining our staff. And once fully implemented, it would provide that stable source of funding to promote the delivery of higher quality care. It would lead to higher salaries for providers and expanding professional development opportunities. And it would result in really more potential employees reentering the workforce and benefits of talent recruitment, retention, and productivity. And this would make Massachusetts, significantly more affordable, greatly improving our economic competitiveness and dramatically increasing racial and gender equity.
Right, I wanted to talk about that price tag, right? There's no real formal price tag for how much this would cost. There's an estimated around $1.5 billion. Can we afford that as a state? Was that part of, you were there for the debate? Was that part of the pushback? What have folks been saying about that? So
I will say there hasn't really been notable pushback to this bill. It passed the Senate unanimously, but that is, when you're talking about $1.5 billion or wherever a big investment like that ultimately lands, there are questions. So I don't think I do think it is a really popular idea to make the childcare system work better for everyone who touches it, to make it more affordable and accessible. But the question, as you suggest, Tori, is really going to come down to where do we find the room in the budget, especially at a time when tax revenues have not been meeting the expectations used to build the budget. We still have a strain placed on the state's coffers by the emergency shelter capacity situation. And there are just a lot of competing needs as you look throughout state government. We're talking about a state budget that numbers in the mid-50s, $58 billion is what Governor Healy is proposing to spend next year. There is, the new millionaire's tax on incomes over $1 million is a source of money for education and transportation needs, but look at all the needs within education. That money's been used for free school meals, for expanding opportunities in higher education. But all of which is to say, when the state government wants to fund something, they do try and find a way. When they passed K-12 school finance reform a few years ago, there wasn't a dedicated funding source attached to that. And it becomes a question for successive legislators. They might want to do it now, but it's whether they can keep paying those bills down the road.
Right, you mentioned during the debate, Senate Education Committee Chair Jason Lewis acknowledged that it would require substantial additional investments, even if they do decide that it's going to be 1.5 for now. And as Patty had mentioned, there's an argument to be made that we can't afford not to do this, right? Because there's an economic boon that it would come out of this. In your reporting, you mentioned the 2022 Max Taxpayers Association report. It found that individuals and families lose $1.7 billion per year from missing work or reducing hours associated with childcare, and employers lose $812 million in tax revenue from those lost wages. So ultimately is the idea that this would supplement the economy, spend money to make money kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things Senate President Spilka has said is this is something we can't afford not to do. There are opportunity costs. I think as Patty was saying, it is a workforce issue. It's being positioned that way because, if your kid is home and you can't find anyone to watch them during the day, how do you go to work? Mm-hmm. How do you pay income tax on that money? So that's, I think, one of the arguments that we're seeing from the bill's supporters is that there's a cost to not doing this, as well as a cost the state will have to bear if this ultimately becomes law.
Right. And Patty, maybe you can help explain this, but the way that childcare works across Massachusetts is that it's largely, predominantly private-owned companies, right, that receive subsidies from the state. I mean, there's a blend of both kinds, but this would subsidize a lot of those workers and able to retain workers and hire new workers and help those child care centers stay open so that they have spaces that are available for parents, right? Because a lot of it is that there's just not availability or time or the workforce.
Yeah. I mean, Massachusetts is lovely in that we have a mixed delivery model here in Massachusetts. And so we have a mix of private pay. We have a mix of family child care centers, some centers who have subsidies and some who don't. We really say that there's something for everybody in Massachusetts. And when it comes to child care, certainly recognizing nannies and doulas and all the folks who support young children. And I would just really echo and say that an upfront investment is necessary here. And we totally get that. But in order to achieve the system we envision for high quality childcare, we have to remember that over the long term, this investment in high quality early education and care, it pays for itself. And having a very high return on investment. I mean, some reports say between $4 and $16 per $1 investment. So by improving education and life outcomes for children, spending on high quality early education and care reduces the need for future government spending on special education, grade repetition, healthcare, incarceration, amongst other things, right? And so by improving workforce participation rates and earnings amongst parents and over the long term, children, investments in high quality early education and care, it also increases economic growth and additional tax revenue.
Right, so it's an investment in everyone at a very early level, essentially. Do you have a sense of where this is headed? Obviously, it's gone to the House now. Mm-hmm. These things take however long they take. If you care to speculate a little bit, do you have any kind of sense about the timeline for this?
So, I mean, I guess kind of a hard deadline would be if the House is going to do something on this, they would most likely need to get it done by July 31st when the formal legislative sessions end for the year. Beyond that, House leaders haven't really tipped their hand. We know that they say they're reviewing the bill that came over from the Senate. Speaker Mariano named child care and early education as one of his priorities when the session began, specifically supporting the workforce. It's not clear really yet if that will be a policy package to answer the Senate, if that'll be more investments in the budget. I'm going to be watching later this week to see what he says to the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce when he talks there Thursday, because about a year ago in a similar address, the speaker kind of put out a call to the business community that this is something the House is going to want help from the private sector on, because it is, like we've been talking about, a whole economy issue.
Right.
So we'll be looking to see if maybe some new details or even tea leaves to read come out then.
Great. Well, we'll keep us posted. Katie Lannon, Patty Sinclair, thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you, Tori.
Thanks.
Thank you, Tori.
Finally tonight at Gateway Arts in Brookline, nearly 100 artists with disabilities create, sell, and show off their work, including everything from textiles to painting to comics. GBH Executive Arts Editor and the Culture Show host Jared Bowen recently visited the studio, which just celebrated its 50th anniversary in 2023. Let's take a look.
Around 8:30 every weekday morning, artists begin arriving at VinFen's Gateway Arts in Brookline, Massachusetts, heading upstairs to studios where they paint, weave textiles, or mold ceramics. This is their job.
Every day I make all kinds of artwork, including this embroidery of my house I used to live in.
Mimi Clark has worked at Gateway Arts for 6 years. A ready supply of colorful threads at her fingertips, she's honed her skills in both fiber arts and puppetry, where she's developed a series called The Bernie and Tulip Monster Show.
It makes me feel so proud, and I'm inspired as my two favorite puppeteers, Jim Henson and Mr. Rogers.
One of the nation's oldest institutions of its kind, Vinfen's Gateway Arts, recently celebrated its 50th anniversary. It was founded in the 1970s when state-run institutions for people with disabilities were shuttered. Gateway opened to fill the vacuum, creating a space for people to either grow their artistic talent or tap into latent skills they didn't even know they had.
We have people with Down syndrome, people in the spectrum. We have head injury, people who are blind, legally deaf. We have people with psychiatric diagnosis.
Who, when they begin work at Gateway, collaborate with facilitators who coach, coax, and encourage their artistic endeavors. Bill Thibodeau is the artistic director.
These people wouldn't have as much chance to get out into the art world on their own. It's hard enough for people graduating from art school to do that as well. So if we can get them a foot in the door and help them as much as we can to be part of the art world, I believe that's important to us and them, especially them.
It's like kind of an old town. It's like supposed to be a Germanic village.
Painter Chuck Johnston is one of Gateway's 98 artists. Once finished in the studio, their work may be shown downstairs in the organization's gallery, offered for sale in its shop, or even published. Johnston's latest volume is his take on television's The Golden Girls.
It's like to put a spin on making it look more animated. Yeah, The Golden Girls, I did that one, and it's like, well, as soon as I finished that, it's like, oh man, I just wish Betty White could have had that one.
Historically, one place work by artists like Johnston and Clark has been omitted is museums. Recently, though, some of the country's largest have begun a course correction. At Boston's Museum of Fine Arts, it's begun with tours highlighting the work of disabled artists in its collection, both contemporary and well-known figures whose disabilities are often only a footnote in their biographies, like Frida Kahlo, whose late career paintings were made while she was confined to her bed, and Edward Manet, who had a nerve disorder that often left him unable to walk or stand upright.
People within the disability community want to see that. They want to see that people like them are creating art and that art is valuable.
Jessica Doonan is the manager of accessibility at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston. She says it's imperative that museums become more expansive in collecting contemporary artists with disabilities as well. Last October, San Francisco's Museum of Modern Art acquired some 150 works of art by artists with developmental disabilities from 3 West Coast organizations with missions like Gateway's. If their art is absent from museum walls, says Doonan, so are their stories.
Art is such a universal language. It is able to convey things that so few words are able to do. And particularly for people with disabilities for whom communicating with the rest of the world is particularly challenging, the opportunity to create art and communicate in that manner is so critical.
And helps break down notions that artists with disabilities somehow don't merit a place on gallery walls.
We've had an exhibition once here where there were our artists alongside some mainstream Boston artists in one exhibition, and people were walking around and said, well, who did this one? And we'd say, it doesn't matter. And we wouldn't tell them, it doesn't matter, it's art.
That's it for tonight, but come back tomorrow. GBH News transportation reporter Bob C. will join us to talk about how he might cut costs and how recent repairs have affected commutes. That and more tomorrow at 7. Thanks for watching. Good night.